So what we really want to do is take you on a journey today through what happens when an organization gets attacked and some of the preparation methods that can be undertaken during the organization preparedness in the event of a cyber attack. So my name's Des. I've been at Dell for nearly 2 years. I've got a nickname in Dell now. It's Digital Des from Dell, or D Cubed. And I sit within our digital and cyber strategy team. And prior to joining Dell, I used to work for EY as a management consultant.
I'm Liz. I am the Cybersecurity and Resilience Specialist at Dell Technologies. I've been here for 5 years now, and I've had a variety of roles in both data protection and more recently cybersecurity and cyber resilience, so helping clients to build strategies and approaches that allow them to recover from a catastrophic cyber attack like a nation state or insider threat.
So on the next slide, we've got an outline of what the presentation is going to cover. So we've broken it into three stages. The first one, we're going to talk around setting the scene. Why is it important now, and what's actually happening within the marketplace? No one industry is a particular target. It is cross multifunctional, and cyber attacks have no mercy. The second thing is around protecting the crown jewels, okay? And this is often referred to as critical data. The idea is that we can take some of the most critical data within an organization and protect that off the network. But what we really want to emphasize throughout this whole presentation is that both Liz and I are both technology optimists, but also we're strategists as well. So technology is only one piece of the pie, and that factors into a broader discussion on building resiliency. And then thirdly, what we really want to do is just talk about some of the lessons learned that other organizations have faced, and some of Liz and I best practice as well on what we would recommend in getting started on a resilient journey. So if we start off on section number 1, we've got a quote on the next slide which highlights the cybersecurity threat landscape. So cybercrime alone costs nations more than 1 trillion globally, right? In essence, what we're trying to say here is that cybercrime is a lucrative business. And in the US, a hacker attack occurs every 30 seconds. And so what the attackers are trying to do is penetrate through the network on a constant basis. And cyber issues and threats are becoming worse than ever before. 20 years ago, the internet was a new and exciting place. And today, it is a bit more daunting to organizations and to people using this device and interaction with organizations. But what we really want to do is talk about encouraging organizations to be proactive rather than reactive. And these statistics are backed up, stating that on average, a large FTSE 100 company that gets attacked can face up to $4 million in downtime revenue. So it's really, really important to outweigh the cost of technology versus the risk that organizations can take, whether or not they're actually resilient in a business. So basically what we're saying here is that it's not if an organization is going to get attacked, it's when. Okay, so these organizations here have been really badly affected by some of the attacks. But what's been really, really beneficial from their misfortune is that they've shared the knowledge and the insight that's actually taken place within their businesses. If we start with the left, on the left-hand side, we've got TravelX. They were hit with a cyber attack by the Revel cyber group on New Year's Eve by a file encryption attack, and in essence took down the business for weeks on end and demanded initially $6 million in ransomware. Now they had a period of time that they had to negotiate this, and they got it down to $2.3 million in Bitcoin ransomware that they had to pay. So you can see that it is lucrative, and it is deemed that the cyber attacks actually is becoming more profitable than the illegal drug trade. So there's a lot of money to be made in this area, right? On the right-hand side, we've got some of the major organizations that have been hit, starting with Sony, where 77 million people's data was actually taken, through to Maersk, where their organization was taken down in a matter of seconds, data breaches with the Marriott, and then more recently with British Airways, where they had 500 million users of their data actually taken. And what happened there was obviously there was brand reputation damage, as well as time out of business and responsiveness. And furthermore, British Airways were actually fined £183 million by the GDPR regulation organisation as well. So that kind of had a massive impact on their overall business and competitiveness. And in days like today with pandemics, no one has planned for them. So it's really important to be on the front foot for a cyber resilience strategy. to make sure that we learn from what's happened in the past and be proactive about what could come in the future. So Liz is just going to take us through what we actually mean by resilience and just some of the examples of why it's more important than ever before.
Thanks, Des. And I think it is really valid, right? It is when, not if anymore. So all of our clients today and every business is really focused on resilience, but it's a buzzword. So I always want to define it, take a step back. So resilience is the ability to recover from or adjust easily to adversity or change. Now, everyone on this call and their businesses that they work for have all gone through mass adversity and change over the last few months. So a lot of organizations have had to move to virtual models. And that isn't just the corporate side, that's also things like supply chain and customer call centers, traditionally brick and mortar. So things that typically were done on site are now being done virtually, which is a great opportunity for businesses. And we're going to see a huge push to digitize. But how companies have been able to adjust has been a challenge. And so this view of building resilience has become even more important. What's interesting is the conversation I had prior to COVID-19 was, resilience isn't something businesses want to do, it's something that they have to do. So building resilience typically is not on the forefront of people's mind. What is are a lot of the sexy technologies, I like to call them, blockchain, AI, big data analytics. Those are the things that are driving profit and revenue, allowing organizations to enter new customer bases, get them more information about their current customers, and really drive value. But at the same time, there's quite an intense regulatory environment, which says as businesses take risks and do things differently, they need to maintain availability and integrity of data. So those are quite competing ideologies, and the only way to do both is to build resilience. So we're kind of at a T right now where organizations understand that they need to build resilience, not only because of the regulatory drivers, but also because of COVID-19. And if you move on to the next slide, we'll actually go into why COVID-19 is driving businesses to think about cyber resilience. So there are four main reasons why businesses today are more than ever looking at building cyber resilience. So the first is there are more people working from home. And when I looked into this, I was like, okay, so how many more people? In the UK, it was around 1.7 million before COVID, and now it's around 20 million. So it is a big gap and a big jump. And in the next slide, we're actually going to talk about some of the risks that working from home poses, but there is a huge both opportunity and challenge with protecting the endpoints, which leads us to the second point, which is how do you increase the protection at the perimeter when the threats are higher? So we're seeing an increase in phishing attacks, an increase in exploiting the endpoints and exploiting virtual private networks because the threat actors are quite intelligent. So they know that there are more people that are using their computer than ever before and accessing critical information. How do we get access to that? The third is outdated plans. So Des and I work alongside resiliency teams and IT teams and business continuity teams. And a lot of times they like to show us their plans for business continuity or disaster recovery or even risk management. And when we look at those plans, they're often quite outdated. They were built by the business 10 years ago. People have added clauses here and there, but we really need to redefine what that looks like in the new era of working and make sure we have an agile approach to risk, because likely the plans that the business had are not matching the demand and need for today's security or cyber resilience. And the last is potential delays in detection. So a lot of what they call like cyber threats are, there's a 99%, 99 days that a cyber threat is inside the organization already. And so what we're noticing is organizations need to make sure that they not only have the ability to respond, but also recover, because likely they're already probably at risk. And so if you move on to the next slide, there are just a few headlines that we'll touch on. In the industry, we're seeing, everyone is talking about how COVID-19 has resulted in a rise in cyber crime and cyber theft and cyber attacks. The UK government 2 days ago came out and kind of gave a warning to any critical, organization that's serving on the front line. So whether it's the NHS or any government institution, anyone that's really trying to aid in reducing the impact of the pandemic, so even pharmaceutical companies, they're highly at risk. And I think when we look at what that is based on, A lot of it is this access to information is becoming a lot more available. So when people are working from home, the home networks a lot of the time are connected to a lot of IoT devices. So we're seeing around 10 IoT devices per household on average now, which is great. Everyone has their Amazon Alexas or their smart TVs, but oftentimes those IoT devices are inherently insecure, which means that there's more opportunity for people to get access to one and then access to many. And it puts a lot of burden on businesses to make sure they're protecting their employees that are working from home and working remotely, to make sure that they're pushing out patch updates as quickly as possible, pushing out any updates to any kind of corporate vulnerabilities, and making sure that the business is secure. So this isn't meant to scare, but I think just to show that we're seeing a shift. And if during a pandemic, the UK government is making a point to say cyber threat is a focus, and we need to make sure we're stepping up in how we respond and recover, it is something that pretty much every business and organization should be thinking about, because anyone can be collateral damage. So if you actually move to the next slide, we'll talk about the 3 things that we work on with the organizations at Dell Technologies. So the first is being ready to respond and recover. And what we mean by that is it's not just a technology. There's no silver bullet solution. It's people, processes, technology, and the larger ecosystem that really help organizations to build resilience. And that's what Des is going to walk through now, is some of the steps that we've learned and the things that we help our clients to do on a daily basis.
So on the next slide, we're just going to talk you through some of the ways to build resilience. Obviously, please do feel free to keep asking questions through the Q&A function as well as we go through. If there's anything that you want us to deep dive a little bit more as well, we can make this as interactive as you wish. If we're going to too low detail, let us know and we'll lift it up a level as well. So look, as Liz just mentioned, the technology is only one piece of the pie, right? And I think that's really where we're changing our position within the marketplace. So we're engaging more as an organization with the C-suite, where traditionally we would have been engaging more so with the IT departments. And our job is now really fundamentally developing a strategy and bringing the IT department together to make sure that any technology investment is utilized, because there's no point in investing in technology that isn't able to meet the demands of the business. So we always start by building executive level awareness. And the idea behind that is, according to Forbes, right, 90% of people that they interviewed who are C-suite members believe that there's an attack that's inevitable on their organization. And 76% of those interviewed stated that their organization is not prepared for this attack. So what we do is bring them along the journey and demonstrate the threat landscape and how cyber attacks are penetrating through the network. The second one then is really taking them on the journey through the IT department and the C-suite around agile risk management and determining what the risk appetite and tolerance is within the organization. And once they've kind of determined what the cost of the technology is versus the risk to their business, there needs to be a strong and practical approach in developing a risk management program that will build through resilience across all parts of the business. It's not just a siloed approach. It needs to have a program level bifunctional organizational approach. Then that's really where we then start to talk about protecting your assets and identifying what is the most critical data and applications that is important to an organization. Imagine a cyber attack hitting your business and not being able to access email or Active Directory. That's kind of some of the things, right? You have a laptop, you won't be able to turn it on. So your business is shut down from day one with employees, payroll, nothing happening. So what does it look like to get your organization back up and running? So we don't take all of the environments. We only take between 10 to 15% of the entire estate that is deemed critical, and that is locked away in a secure vault, which Liz and I are going to talk through in a moment. Once that's done, then we need to also, in parallel, understand and align the critical processes that are important. Nobody planned for a pandemic, right? Most business continuity plans are out of date. So there needs to be an update on your processes, who's responsible for what, and take an organization along the journey, because it is a massive cultural shift. And technical services need to make sure that people know how to run the vault and people know how to get data in and out of the vault. So those processes do need to be taken into consideration when looking at building a cyber resilient business. And finally, it's really important that you test and retest not only your technology, but your processes and the people capabilities. So when the worst actually happens, you don't want to be doing this just on the first day. You want to be able to do this in a simulated environment where you imagine an attack has actually happened, and put your policies and procedures in place in a day that is a normal BAU. So that kind of just demonstrates the 5 key ways that we build resilience. And we're now going to take you on to the next section of the presentation, which talks through the protecting the crown jewels. And Liz is going to start that now. So over to the next slide. Thank you.
Awesome. So we actually originally had a video here, and video is incredibly difficult to do on Zoom and often ends up having tons of audio errors. So instead, we put this together for you to kind of set the scene. So what Des and I do every day is we essentially help large enterprise organizations to build data vaults. And what is a data vault? It's really not dissimilar to what you would see in a bank, where you put all of your really, large amounts of money, your really important documents, you file those away so that no one can access them. There's a crazy code, probably a bunch of guards. But we do this on a virtual scale. We build technologies that essentially isolate data off the network. So in the event of a catastrophic incident, you can actually recover critical materials in the event of a nation state attack or an insider threat. So when you hear about the UK government saying we need to protect data, be able to recover, it would be recovering with some sort of solution like this. Des, is there anything you want to add in terms of kind of what the vault is before we talk about critical materials and crown jewels?
Yeah, I think just to back it up, I think the vault sounds so American and so productionalized, but it's basically just a hidden data center or a piece of technology, either on people's premise or on a hosted site. But it's so secure, hardly any employees are allowed getting access to it. There's CCTV cameras, it's a lockdown vault. So the criticality of this is literally like the crown jewels, and that is what we fundamentally refer to within this space. So on the next slide, there's an image using an analogy, and just a heads up, that's not me and Liz on a hammock, but Liz, over to you to demonstrate how we protect.
So we talk a lot about crown jewels and critical materials, and in conversation with colleagues, Des and I were trying to make it super simple, like, what are the critical materials that we suggest organizations protect in the event of a catastrophic incident? It's not dissimilar to what you put in your carry-on when you're going on a trip. And I think all of us would love to just take a minute and visualize the trip that we want to go on, but obviously we're going to stay at home and do the right thing. But let's say we're going on a trip, you have your carry-on, it's going to have all the essentials, everything that you need to be able to move between countries at ease if anything goes wrong. So your passport, credit cards, some money, probably any medications you might need, really the essentials that you need to operate and live in the world. In your check bag are the nice to haves. So that outfit for dinner, the swimsuit for the pool, kind of all the things that you would like, but you won't die without. And so we very literally have these conversations with our clients, and they always kind of fight with us and say we need everything. Everything's critical. Data is money. And they're not wrong, but in this instance, we're talking about a catastrophe, almost an existential crisis. Like, they will potentially fail to exist as a business if they don't have the ability to recover. So we're talking about basics. These are things like Active Directories and DNS. And for those non-techies on the phone, that's really just the core systems of any business that has IT. So who's in the business, who's who in the zoo, who has access to what. When Maersk was hit with NotPetya, they didn't have access to any Active Directories or DNS, so they were using WhatsApp to communicate. And we'll talk about examples later because they've really been forthcoming in kind of sharing their story. But these are very critical materials that would be provided to a business to allow them to recover. Des, anything you want to add in some of our conversations about this with clients?
I think that's it. I mean, it's if it has a process and people know what to do when in the event of an attack, then it's not deemed as critical for the vault.
I think that's helpful for those trying to understand what is critical for any business. And I think when we start developing these strategies, if you move on to the next slide, we talk very clearly on these 4 points to start building a cyber resilient solution. So there are 4 things that every business needs to do to start that journey and building that vault. Is what's critical. Again, we help clients with this all the time. What are the kind of core applications or processes needed to run the business? What's the volume and size of that? How quickly does the business want to recover? And again, we're often talking days, not hours, because this is a catastrophic event. And then how does it align to the business strategy? How does it align to the cloud strategy? How is this helping support the resiliency and security initiatives today, not detracting? So these are the kind of conversations that we start with. And I think what would be best now is if we go into some of the lessons learned from not only the work we've done with other clients, but also the work in the industry and some of the attacks that have happened, to really, help everyone understand some lessons learned they can take back to their businesses. So there are 5 main ways that organizations can optimize cybersecurity strategies by leveraging these tips. Des and I are just going to walk through them, and hopefully this will leave great opportunity for questions. But the first one, if you want to move to that, is slow businesses don't survive. So you need to be responding in the event of a cyber threat incident within 24 hours. That is the expectation. In fact, it wouldn't be surprised if it's even faster now, given our attention spans and our expectations in the digital world that we live in. But the only way to respond quickly is to have a communication plan ahead of time. So organizations need to know what they're going to say, not only to their customers, because oftentimes companies are really good at responding to the world and their customers, but they leave their employees a bit to the side. So having a really strong response both to employees and to customers, on what the process is for an employee. Am I to open my laptop? Yes or no? Where am I to go? And kind of doing a really good job in preparation. And the best way to do that really is tabletop exercises. Des and I have done them. A lot of companies do them internally, but thinking down to the strategy of who's in charge of what. And I think that actually nicely leads us on to point 2, Des, in terms of support.
Yeah, so it's really important that leadership within a turmoil situation is really, really important. So it's very important to identify who your key leaders are for each of your business units and what they're in charge of. So developing out a roles and accountability and consulted and informed matrix for determining where you go and what actually happens in an event such as a cyber attack is really, really important. So like you saw recently with Boris Johnson being admitted to a hospital, the country had a plan in place to activate what needed to happen to make sure that there was calmness and it felt that everything was in control. So it's very important that during an attack that there is a keep calm and carry on mentality, and there is strong leadership within the organization. So people, employees and stakeholders feel that everything's in control while you're trying to recover and identify where the attack has come in, but also bring the data back into the organization as well.
Moving on to point 3, we want to be able to learn from some of the attacks that have happened. And so there's a lot of literature out there. I saw Des just shared the article on MERS that was done in Wired, which is phenomenal. And there's a couple books I can mention at the end as well for those really interested in more on the nation state side. But there's a lot we can learn. So Sony Pictures was the first of its kind. It was the first data destruction attack we'd ever seen. That's goal was to destroy the business, delete its data. Prior to that, we'd seen people stealing data for money, but not ever really deleting the data or wreaking havoc. So what we've learned from a lot of these attacks, so Sony Pictures has come out and said, know who to call, know who can help you, kind of have those service level agreements agreed with your suppliers. So I think that's an incredibly valuable one. Over the last 5 years, we also saw NotPetya release a lot of really good insights for people on how do they cope with this. And I've read a lot of them, but I guess a couple key things I've learned that people did really well that responded. The first was executives got involved quickly and they were on every call, really showed leadership. The second is they communicated effectively. So they had those communication plans already outlined. And the third was that they delegated. And in certain instances, that was to the local sites because they were using WhatsApp to communicate and it was so difficult. They said to the local sites, do what's right for you and the employees and also the customers as well. And I think what's collectively common across all of these is what they wish they would have been able to do. And that comes down to 2 things. The first is we wish we could have isolated the attack quicker and really stopped it from spreading and impacting. And the second is we wish we could have responded and recovered faster as well. So I think having both of those in a strategy is incredibly important. And that's what Des and I focus on is really that recovery piece, having good data to recover.
We've got 2 more kind of recommendations from Liz and I, and then we can get on to Q&A. So please feel free to drop your Q&A into the chat function. We can answer them in real time. So the risk appetite, we mentioned it earlier on. Do you pay the ransom? Do you try and recover? Do you try and start the business again from scratch? That needs to be determined from the outset of what your strategy and approach actually needs to encompass. And do you actually have the data available for recovery? So it kind of determines through the organization what level of tolerance that you're willing to take with the attacks. But I think what we've mentioned earlier on, that is that they're on the rise. You know, in the second week of lockdown in the US Health Department was attacked by a cyber threat. And more recently then, Liz sent me an article today from the BBC. The government are saying that a lot of the healthcare sector is being hit and predominantly targeted on cyber attacks now, because what they feel, the attackers feel, is that they've got their foot off the ball within IT departments in these areas, and that the opportunity for them to attack is greater because the organizations in healthcare are obviously trying to make sure that we've got service for our people, so there may not be focus on IT and security. So we're seeing this on the rise, and it's kind of, the ethos here is expect the unexpected, because the attacks are getting more sophisticated as well in nature. And as we said, you know, it is the new form of bank robbery now, and it is holding organizations to ransom quite literally. So on the last point that we have, of point number 5, everyone in organization has a responsibility, from whether they click on dodgy website links or phishing emails, etc. We all need to remain vigilant, and anyone within an organization or any organization can get attacked. It's no longer when, it's no longer if, it's when. But we really like to refer to Netflix. Netflix had 15.8 million new users over the last 3 months to their service. And jokingly, they've been deemed as a critical service during the pandemic. But what's really interesting is that they were very well ahead of the game. And they use this thing called chaos engineering, where they simulate an attack and take services down on a day-to-day basis without any of the users actually knowing. So they simulate all of these different scenarios to make sure that their level of service actually remains consistent. So it's really important that these organizations take these considerations into place, and being strategic and looking at it from a holistic perspective is really, really important.